Okay, flying weather graphic showing blizzard warnings and winter storm warnings continue in the red shaded areas here. Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, all of the Seward Peninsula, and up in toward Kotzebue along the northwest coast there, Kivalina, Red Dog up to, Red Dog Dock up to Point Hope, Cape Lisburne. And winter weather advisories out for the Noatak Valley there and eastern Norton Sound here, Norton Bay area down towards Stebbins and St. Michael. Unalakleet under a winter weather advisory for snow and blowing snow, as well as the lower Yukon Valley area. These are out for overnight tonight and then improving and ending by tomorrow morning. Otherwise, you can see on the satellite imagery here, one surge of moisture pushing up to the north and a little bit of a break here occurring along the southwest coast today. That pushing up into the North Slope area. Another surge coming northward here, making landfall, at least the clouds here along the southwest coast into Bristol Bay during the day today. And that cloud feature extending all the way down across the eastern Aleutians and off the map there. And then a system out here to the west a little bit there over the AKwx area break. And then the clouds of the next system way back there to the west. Otherwise, high pressure still ridged over western Alaska, the main ridge axis there, holding the precipitation back, not letting too much get through. Had a little bit of light snow as far east as Ruby today. Otherwise, the interior seeing some variable high clouds, cirrus, south central Alaska, up into the Tanana Valley, all the way up there to the eastern Brooks Range area, and a lot of clear skies. Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, all the way down across the Panhandle. Good sunshine today. Temperatures on the chilly side. Winds a little gusty there for Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. On the chart, high pressure over the Yukon, again giving that dry northeast flow across all of the Panhandle there. Southern Alaska, mostly sunny today. Mid clouds coming into south central Alaska, Cook Inlet area, as well as a lot of variable cirrus here over the central and eastern part of the state, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast. And then the heavy snow and blowing snow occurring here from the Yukon Delta up across St. Lawrence Island, actually improving St. Lawrence Island there behind that front, kind of oscillating back and forth. You can see the tighter gradient in advance of that front, and winds gusting anywhere from 40 to 75 miles per hour today. Over the last 24 hours, Cape Lisburne, for example, had wind gusts quite strong, up around 75 or 80 miles an hour, and less everywhere else, but very windy conditions all the way up to the western Arctic coast. Milder temperatures bringing some mixed conditions here as far as precipitation goes. Some areas of freezing rain into the Yukon Delta area, but then generally rain for the Pribilofs on down to the Alaska Peninsula with gusty south and southeast winds. And also some rain for the eastern Aleutians and some rain showers back toward the main, a weak low actually, that one near the AKwx area. A little chillier back to the west there, so snow showers for the Shimei and Attu zones. Otherwise, high pressure here over the Northeast Pacific pretty much holds through tonight. This one actually strengthens there over the Yukon. That tightens the gradient up over the Panhandle for some increase in the winds, gale force northerlies there for Lynn Canal, and pretty breezy conditions in areas all the way down toward Dixon entrance, so it lets up there and out along the coast, not much wind. Light variable wind conditions, south central Alaska and the North Gulf Coast, as well as Kodiak Island. Much of southern Alaska here from Bristol Bay eastward and northward, looking at pretty light wind conditions. That may lead to some low clouds and fog to form over Cook Inlet late during the nighttime hours, maybe into tomorrow morning in areas. And again, it may not develop, but the possibilities there with the light wind conditions. And otherwise, this weather system, especially the northern portion here, really weakening as that main bulk of moisture pulls off to the north. The other surge coming northward here with rain spreading up to the Yukon Delta, or the Kuskokwim Delta coast, Nunivak Island, periods of rain. Gusty winds, maybe winds 40 to 60 miles an hour along the Alaska Peninsula and gusts, especially around Cold Bay. Lighter winds, but still periods of light rain for the eastern Aleutians. IFR flying conditions there up toward the Pribilofs. Should be in the warm air for just continued rainfall there for St. Paul and St. George. Areas of snow, but you can see the gradient here pretty slack now. Actually across even the northwest part of the state, really lightening up now, but snow possibly heavy at times in the upslope areas of the Brooks Range continues. Mostly snow on the southern part of the Seward Peninsula. And then looking ahead to tomorrow, we'll see about the same pattern here. Weak trough up here along the west coast through the Bering Strait areas to the western Arctic coast. Precipitation field kind of pulling back to the west a little bit, not making much eastward progress with a strong upper level ridge centered in over western Alaska. Northerly flow on the east side of that. And actually, disturbance dropping southward in that northerly flow, kind of bringing some cloudiness, increased cloudiness here over the eastern interior. Risk of some light snow showers over the eastern Alaska Range, maybe the eastern Arctic coast, and a little more so into the Yukon there, but nothing too heavy at all. Variable clouds to mostly clear skies for the Panhandle again. Winds much lighter tomorrow. The gradient really slackens off here for the southeast coast, so light wind conditions during much of the day. Variable clouds with areas of partly to mostly sunny skies. Again, southern Alaska. Could see a few sun breaks even up in the interior there. Cloudy skies here for the western interior areas. And then for the day on Tuesday, this frontal boundary continues to weaken, hung up along the coast, trying to edge eastward a little bit, but getting so weak now. Leftover moisture not really there, just some scattered rain and snow showers here over the inland areas of the state. Maybe more of a continuous precipitation pattern along the coast, Yukon, Kuskokwim Delta coast, Nunivak Island, and maybe the Pribilofs back down to the eastern Aleutians. Then that frontal boundary, weak frontal boundary, keeping it unsettled along the northwest coast, Kotzebue Sound area, even to the western Arctic coast, but just to the east, look for a lot of clearing again. And cold temperatures continue over much interior Alaska, all the way down into the Gulf of Alaska. Light winds, mostly sunny skies, Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, Prince William Sound, Copper River Basin, snow showers possible on the eastern or the northern slopes of the eastern Alaska Range. Places like Northway Tok, maybe Nabezna, could see some light snow or flurries with minor accumulations, probably no accumulations at all. Another sunny day for the southeast coast with dry northeast, light northeast winds continuing there. And out to the west here, got some snow here as that pushes into the eastern Aleutians back toward Atka Islands, the colder air out to the west, but not a big push of that at all. Next front out to the west, pretty darn weak, and just bringing some areas of light rain and snow into the southwest Bering Sea. Lows tonight, about 10 below in the Copper River Basin, otherwise 10 upper teens to upper 20s for the Kuskokwim Valley, lows in the 20s for Bristol Bay, upper 20s Kodiak Island, 5 below to 15 above south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula. Single numbers there around Yakutat, 10 to 15 northern Panhandle, 15 to 20 down to the south. Highs tomorrow in the 20s to mid-30s for the southeast coast, mid-teens in the Copper River Basin, 20 to 25 south central Alaska, a little milder around Homer, upper 30s for Kodiak. Highs 35 to 40 in Bristol Bay, lower 40s up into the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Lows the following morning, Tuesday morning, 5 to 10 below in the Copper River Basin, and in the single numbers and teens, south central Alaska, mid-20s Kodiak Island, and in the 20s there for Bristol Bay, and 5 to 10 northern Panhandle to mid-teens to the south, and then highs following highs, looks like freezing or below everywhere over the southern Panhandle, and then the mid to upper 20s to the north. Otherwise, 20s to near 30, south central Alaska, teens Copper River Basin. Looks like Kuskokwim Valley rising above freezing near 40 for Bristol Bay. Up to the north, lows tonight 10 below to 10 above for the northern interior, in the teens into the Tanana Valley there. And for the then computer problems, lost the temperatures for the highs tomorrow, so out to the southwest coast, lows in the 30s, highs in the 30s to lower 40s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Band of IFR here from Adak eastward to the Alaska Peninsula, extending north across eastern Bering Sea and along the west coast into the southern Seward Peninsula, through the Bering Strait and up into the northwest coast and Noatak Valley. Another piece breaking off here along the central Arctic coast. Otherwise, VFR over the interior with possible areas of marginal VFR here due to low clouds and fog forming underneath upper level high pressure over the interior, but not too bad. Kodiak VFR, Bristol Bay, Panhandle VFR, and since this area is lying pretty much parallel to the wind flow, doesn't really make much eastward progress. In fact, it retreats back to the west a little bit here and off the coast, or right along, marginal VFR along the coast, IFR now off the southwest coast, still covering the eastern half of the Bering Sea, and from about Adak eastward now, although spreading up toward Kodiak Island, not quite making it into the Trinity Islands, Sitkinak, give or take there. But VFR, interior Alaska, some IFR showing up due to a cold upper level low coming down out of Mackenzie Bay, Baffin Island area, or I'm sorry, Banks Island area. And that could lower the conditions here with some, maybe even some flurries here over the eastern interior, along the eastern border. Central interior good, some IFR central Arctic coast, VFR for the Panhandle. And then for Tuesday morning, a little bit more in the way of some moisture getting into the interior here with spotty areas of IFR all the way up to the north slope there. But southeast of the Alaska Range looking pretty good here. Still possible marginal VFR for the Cook Inlet area. IFR over toward the eastern border down to North Wyandotte, possibly Nabezna and the Panhandle staying good. And IFR still hung up here along the coast, now into Bristol Bay, and still looks like up over southern Kodiak Island, eastern Aleutian areas. And from there for the afternoon, improves considerably here, but a lot of marginal VFR Kodiak Island up into Prince William Sound area, and good conditions for the Panhandle. And possible areas of marginal VFR in the interior, improving from what you have in the morning here. It's really not too bad over interior Alaska. And this area is starting to shrink, but holding along the southwest coast there through the Bering Strait, and not too bad out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Passes for tomorrow, Monday. Marginal VFR, kind of marginal for Anaktuvuk and Adigan. But Lake Clark and Merrill staying VFR tomorrow on either approach. Same forecast for rainy, good VFR again for Monday through the day, and windy as well. VFR. Isabel, really good there. VFR through the north and south entrance. And Mentasta becoming a little marginal with that moisture coming in from the north and northeast. So we'll go marginal for Mentasta, but Tanita VFR, and Portage also VFR with Chilkoot and White holding at VFR. Freezing levels, warm air associated with the upper level high pressure area here, and the persistent southerly winds out over the eastern Bering Sea along the southwest coast. So 2,000 feet up there over the north slope, and 6,000 feet up into the lower Yukon River Valley area, all the way down to Kodiak Island. Icing free over interior Alaska, Gulf of Alaska, and the Panhandle. Possible some light, isolated, moderate icing here. Possible Nunivak Island, Yukon Delta coast, maybe Seward Peninsula, and the northwest coastal areas. Also moderate turbulence, possible moderate icing possible there for the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the, excuse me, Bering Strait. And then some icing threats all the way down in toward the central Aleutians. And jet stream, here's that upper level ridge I spoke of here, right over, south Kamishak Bay, give or take there, but extending right up into the Arctic Ocean. Good southerly flow on the west side of that up to, 120 knots, 125 knots across the eastern Aleutians. Northerly flow not quite as strong as the southerly flow, about 95 to 85 knots. And at 9,000 feet, much the same pattern, high pressure through the central interior, centered over Cook Inlet, southerly winds 60 to 70 knots along the west coast there, northerlies up to 40 to 45 knots coming down into the northern Panhandle. And for 3,000 feet, high pressure, again, eastern interior, windy conditions up to 55 knots, translate into widespread area turbulence across all of western Alaska to the out.
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. But what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. With the water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015, and the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
But we know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for the south coast, north to northeast winds for the day Monday, 15 to 20 knots, seas around 6 feet. The north coast, northeast winds at 15 knots, and for Lynn Canal, winds diminishing throughout the day to 20 knots in the afternoon, still from the north winds 20 knots for Stevens Passage. Seas about 4 feet there, and northwest winds at 20 knots for Clarence Strait. For the day Tuesday, northwest winds continue at about 20 knots for Clarence Strait, and north and northwest winds here for the central northern inner channels at 20 knots. And the south coast, north to northeast winds at 20 knots, and northeast winds and east winds 20 to 25 knots for the north coast. And moving over to Prince William Sound tomorrow, as well as the North Gulf Coast, looking pretty light and variable on the winds. And the sea's not too bad, about 4 to 5 feet here in the North Gulf Coast, 2 feet or less in Prince William Sound. Northern Cook Inlet, same thing, variable winds at 10 knots. Southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, north winds at 15 knots. And the Barren Islands, light southwest wind, 15 knots. Shelikof Strait, light variable winds. And the east side of Kodiak Island, south breeze at 15 knots, seas under 10 feet. Then for Tuesday, west winds 20 knots here for Kodiak, Shelikof Strait, southwest at 15. Light variable winds continue, northern Cook Inlet, north 15 south of the Forelands. And for Kamishak Bay, down across the Barren Islands, northwest winds at 20 knots. Northeast at 15 for the eastern or western North Gulf Coast. Light variable winds around Middleton Island, light northerlies there for Prince William Sound at 10 knots, seas staying slight. Bristol Bay on Monday, tomorrow, small craft advisories, east winds 25 knots. Gale warnings here for the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast winds 35 to 40 knots at Gannett to Castle Cape, southeast at 25. And for Tuesday, Alaska Peninsula, west-southwesterlies at 20 to 25 knots, Bristol Bay south at 20. And for the eastern Aleutians, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Central Aleutians here, north winds 25 to 35 knots. And then west 25 from Kiska Island on out, or from Amchitka Island out to Shemya. And then for the day on Tuesday, western Aleutians, west of Adak, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, Adak and Atka northwest at 20. And the eastern Aleutians also looking at northwest winds at 20 knots with seas running 9 to 13 feet. Southwest coast, still a pretty good southeast wind tomorrow here, 30 to 35 knots, southeast 30 also for St. Lawrence Island. Swinging around to the north at 30 knots, west of St. Matthew Island, still southeast to the east of St. Matthew Island. Pribilofs tomorrow, southeast of 25. And northwest winds 25 knots for the Pribilofs on Tuesday. Southwest coast, small craft advisories, brisk wind advisories, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Southeast 25 for St. Lawrence Island. West 25, St. Matthew Island. And the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east-southeast winds tomorrow 30 knots, high enough for brisk wind advisories. And the central coast, southeast of 25, southeast 20 knots for the western coast. And from Cape Beaufort to Wales, south to southeast winds at 25 knots. For Tuesday, Wales to Cape Thompson, southeast winds 25 knots. Otherwise, the western Arctic coast here, southerlies 15 to 20 knots. Southeast 20 for the central Arctic coast. And picking up gale force southeast winds at 35 knots there from Kaktovik over toward Barter Island to Demarcation Point. Otherwise, brisk wind advisories here east of Point Barrow to about Dead Horse. And for the night tonight, fair skies, variable clouds over interior Alaska, mostly clear southern Alaska with light winds. Clear and breezy over the Panhandle. On the chilly side, rain, wind, Alaska Peninsula. Less rain, less wind here for the Yukon Delta, and improving conditions here along the west coast throughout the night tonight as that frontal boundary weakens, but kind of stays put out here, but even less precipitation and wind by tomorrow afternoon for the northwest coastal areas. And this keeps it kind of windy. This system here over the just north of the Fox Islands keeps it windy and wet for the Alaska Peninsula up to the Kuskokwim Delta coast. And then for Tuesday, still clear and cold temperatures over the Panhandle, clear and cold over the central and eastern part of the state, all the way up to the Arctic coast. And areas of light snow or rain and snow mix there along the west coast with the remnants of this weak frontal boundary here, all the way down to the eastern Aleutians. Out to the west, not too bad, a pretty good break here over the Bering Sea, and then a weak front spreads some rain and snow showers into the western Aleutian areas. Thank you.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.